You can download the art seen in the video for free, link in the description. For a mirror and water reflection effect in Godot, first, for the mirror effect, add a sprite. Set the texture to the art that you can download, link in the description for free. Set the texture to nearest as we're using pixel art. Go to region, hit enable, edit region, scroll in with the mouse wheel, then select the mirror and hit close. Reposition the node. I'll add a sprite as a child. Right click and rename it to shadow. I will add the art atlas again. Go to region, hit enabled, hit edit region, and I'll select the shadow. Set the position to 0:9. Then in visibility, enable show behind parent. We will then add an additional sprite. Rename it to mirror bounds. This sprite will define the boundary for the reflection. We'll then add the art atlas texture from before. Then go to region, hit enabled, and edit region. This time we'll select the piece of the inside of the mirror, as we don't want the reflection to overlap the outer components of the mirror. Next, we must offset this piece by -13 on the y-axis. This is so the bottommost pixel is where the center of the position of the sprite is, represented by this crosshair. Next, we set the position to 0/13, so that way this piece is placed perfectly on our mirror. Next, inside of visibility, we enable clip only. This will make this mirror piece invisible and transform it into a boundary for its children, meaning that child sprites will only be visible within the opaque pixels of the sprite. We will then add a sprite 2D node as a child. Rename it to player mirror reflection. Set its texture to the player sprite. I will then offset the sprite so that the bottom pixel is aligned at the base of the mirror bounds. I will then offset the sprite by -5 on the y-axis. This is so the bottom of the sprite is equal to the bottom of the inside of the mirror. I will add an additional sprite 2D and rename it to shadow. I will add the art atlas texture into region, edit region, and select this shadow sprite. Then I will set the position to 0 by -5 so that it appears at the bottom of the character. Finally, I will go to visibility and enable show behind parent. To finish the mirror reflection effect, I will add a script to the player mirror reflection sprite node. Inside, we will define an export variable for the player node. This will be used to grab the player and is the best method for grabbing a node without worrying about the scene tree hierarchy. Inside the built-in process function, we will check if the player node has been set. Then we will define a variable for the distance from the player, which will be equal to the player's global Y position minus our parent's global Y position. We use our parent's global Y position instead of our own, as our own position will be constantly changing. This is also why it's important that the player mirror reflection sprite's node's position is at 0,0. So make sure that any offset is done with the offset property. Next, we set our global position. We copy the player's X position, as there shouldn't be an offset there. We then set the difference between the parent's global Y position to the distance from the player variable. This establishes a line of reflection at the crosshair that we saw earlier, and ensures that the reflection sprite moves up from that crosshair when the player moves down from the crosshair, and vice versa. This concludes the basics of the mirror reflection effect. For the visuals, we will first make the reflection fade as it gets further away from the player. The 0.85 is the maximum opacity that the reflection can ever be, which I use 0.85 instead of 1.0 as the reflection of a mirror is never fully clear. We then use 0.04 to alter the fade amount based on the distance that the player is from the reflection. Increasing this will make the reflection fade faster at a shorter distance from the mirror crosshair. We then set the flip H value to the opposite of the player's sprite as a mirror is flipped. We can make it equal to the opposite by using an exclamation mark. Next, because I'm using region rect to control my player's animation, I will change the Y position of the region rect, so when the player is looking up, the reflection is looking down and vice versa. You may want to change this if you are using frames instead of region rect. To complete this mirror effect, simply set the player node variable to the player. For the water reflection effect, while you could use the same exact method as the mirror effect with the boundary sprite, we will use an alternate approach that is easier to implement and in some cases more performant. Go to your player scene, select your main sprite and press Ctrl or Command+D to duplicate it. Remove the shadow sprite and any other unnecessary nodes that are below the sprite, such as animation players. Rename it to player reflection. Next, enable flip V and I will change my offset to 5 on the y-axis. All you need to do is to make sure that the offset is set in a way where the crosshair is at the bottom of the player's feet. Also, make sure that the player reflection sprite is touching the bottom of the main sprite. We will then change its opacity to 100 so that it looks more realistic when overlapping the water. We will then set the Z index to -2. This is very important as in our game, the grass block tile set is at a Z index of -1 and the water block tile set is at a Z index of -3. This means that our player reflection sprite should be covered by all content that isn't water, making the reflection effect. To finish this effect off, go to the player script. Make sure that all visual animations and effects are the same on the player reflection sprite as they are on the main sprite. For me, this includes flip H and region rect position. However, you may need to also copy frame, scale, position, offset, and any other properties that you are using. Just make sure that the player reflection sprite mimics the main sprite node.